All right, welcome to A Growing Concern. As we've talked about many times in the past, we're going to talk about water tonight. More specifically, the upcoming initiative to establish a Portland Public Water District. It's put forth by a local group, Portlanders for Water Reform. They don't have a website, but they have these days, it's even better, they have a Facebook page. So Portlanders for Water Reform. A fellow named Kent Crayford and Floyd Jones are two folks that are involved with gathering signatures, which they're doing right now. And I guess there's been a splinter from that, and they're also gonna start gathering signatures soon as well. That group is the Cascadian Public Trust. They're coming out of the Occupy Mount Tabor group, and we might touch on that a little bit. But my guest here is Travis Williams. He's with the Willamette Riverkeeper, actually the executive director of Willamette Riverkeeper, and he's not up to date on that new initiative. But we'll talk about all things water tonight having to do with this initiative. But first we should talk a little bit about Willamette Riverkeeper. There's a nationwide group of riverkeepers, and this is part of that organization or part of that umbrella.
Yeah, exactly. Nationally, it's the Waterkeeper Alliance, which came off of the Hudson Riverkeeper that was founded, I think, in the early 80s.
Is that the river that caught on fire back east?
No, that was the Cuyahoga in Ohio. But the Hudson Group was the first to prosecute folks for pollution utilizing the Rivers and Harbors Act going back quite a few decades. And people liked the model of a watchdog. That's kind of how they were when they formed. Certainly they've broadened beyond that. And so they started letting people use the name Riverkeeper on their own rivers, and then soon bays and sounds and other waterways. And today, worldwide, there's over 200 of those organizations under the Waterkeeper Alliance umbrella. So we have been around since 1996, and also in our area we have the Tualatin Riverkeepers. They're the only ones who are plural. Because they formed before the official creation of the umbrella organization. Willamette Riverkeeper, my organization, Columbia Riverkeeper. There's also a Rogue Riverkeeper now. They've been around a few years. Siuslaw, and then Klamath. So we have some really amazing rivers that now have this Riverkeeper model. And I think what makes our organizations a little different is that we typically are close to the resource. We are typically out on the water, at the very least periodically, have a very good understanding of what a given waterway is like seasonally. And then because of that, you typically gain a good connection with landowners and or municipalities, and that connects you to the issues. And so in Willamette Riverkeeper's case, we have issues from the hydropower dams up in the tributaries to the Willamette, to the city of Eugene and Springfield. And then you come down and you catch Harrisburg, Corvallis, Albany, Salem, Kaiser, Newburgh. Then you're kind of into the Portland metro area. And across that nearly 200 miles, you know, we encounter a whole host of issues. So number one to Riverkeeper organizations is enforcing the Clean Water Act, implementing and enforcing the Clean Water Act. So we all have to be willing to take some action under the Clean Water Act where it may be violated. And Willamette Riverkeeper has done that multiple times. We typically do that multiple times every year, actually, with permits that are granted under the Clean Water Act that allows people to discharge treated effluent. And that comes in a variety of forms. You have stormwater, then you have industrial permits, and those are different, but the same general principle applies. In our case, as I mentioned, we have gotten involved with hydropower issues, fish passage at the dams in the Willamette system. We get involved at times in development issues. Certainly the public education piece is big for us. We like to get people out there on the water, on their, what is really a fantastic natural place, the Willamette, to see it and explore it and learn about it. And it's always been our hope that when people get that proximity to the river and they get a whole new viewpoint of it, they kind of gain a greater connection to it. And I think that holds true in many examples. And then we also get involved with sometimes riverbank issues where someone might go in and cut down riparian vegetation, that sort of thing. And then on the habitat restoration side, we have multiple habitat restoration projects that we sponsor. Sometimes solely it's Willamette Riverkeeper. Sometimes we have partners. They come and big size, small size. We kind of have a little bit of everything going on in that respect.
Like some of the partners, who would they be?
We work with soil and water conservation districts and sometimes watershed councils, sometimes other nonprofits like Audubon Society of Portland, that sort of thing. We actually have a really nice project on Ross Island. You know, the city now owns about 44 acres of that island on the downstream end. And that was given to the city about, 6 years ago. And there was a lot of work to be done removing invasive plants and then planting native plants. And so we kind of have an ongoing project there in collaboration with both the City of Portland and Audubon Society of Portland. And then we get down to the Superfund site, which is our 10-mile stretch
ongoing
of
headache.
Contaminated river. That is, decades long and goes back many decades in terms of the types of pollution that are now found in the river sediments there. But that has been listed as a federal Superfund site since December of 2000. It's hard to believe it's been that long ago. And that has created a situation where the EPA tasks the entities that are liable for the pollution. Either they were directly connected to it or they purchased property that was connected to it. And those folks are now moving forward in a process to clean the river up. And so really for the last 12 years we've been studying the river carefully. And we could talk a little bit more about this later because it's connected to the overall topic.
Right.
But we've been studying it. There are now some options to clean it up, and the U.S. EPA will be formulating a draft cleanup plan sometime in 2014, either summer or toward the end of the year. We're not sure when it's going to show up.
Well,
so a lot of issues on the Willamette.
Wasn't there a National Geographic article in the 50s or 60s or something that how bad this river was, and it was cleaned up? But it was cleaned up when all these sediments were still there then.
Well, it was June of 1972.
Oh, what's that soon?
Yeah,
Okay.
but it was a cover photo of it. It's great. There's a family. I think it was taken somewhere down by Independence, Oregon, which is a little upriver of Salem, and they're floating on what looks like a homemade raft, and it's got the American flag, and it was sort of a very celebratory.
Norman Rockwell.
Yeah, exactly. It was a very celebratory image to kind of congratulate the efforts that the state made, and of course there are many people pushing the state and we're thinking of Governor Tom McCall, and he's often credited solely with making such a change for the Willamette. A lot of other people were involved too, but he was certainly a massive presence there making it happen. But that June 72 article was showing what the state did, talked about primary treatment and the treatment systems that were coming online to raise dissolved oxygen levels in the Willamette and reduce other types of pollution. And it's really an interesting chronicle, and you can still find copies of that around here and there. It's an interesting article.
But that was all upriver from Portland then, what was going on?
No, it included the whole thing.
Did it?
Yeah, and I think kind of getting to your point there, these PCBs were in the Willamette at that time, and I think we added on since 72, at least for a certain amount of time. But I think in that intervening 40 years, if you're looking from then to now, it's kind of a good analogy is, you don't go into a doctor's office today and expect them to use the same science and approaches and technology to treat the human body as they did in 72.
Certainly not the same pills, that's for sure.
But I think it's some of our understanding of toxics and our understanding and acceptance of the way they work and the impact of certain types of pollution is maybe more well understood by a greater number of people today than it was back then.
Sure.
So it's just maybe an evolution of thinking and kind of the regulatory process catching up. Because of course Superfund didn't come until I think almost a decade later.
And the Clean Water Act and all that came under Nixon in the 70s, didn't it?
Right. Yeah, that was 72 as well. Yeah.
All right. So, we whine about Republicans, but the Republicans today aren't like the Republicans back then who actually passed conservation. And that if it wasn't for that, we have some real issues with the Willamette River, and we have issues in spite of that as well. And we don't drink the water, although there has been moves to have a strength of water. Isn't there supposed to be some kind of mixing plant up on Mount Powell Butte or whatever that's going to mix the water from the Willamette with the water coming from Bull Run Watershed? Is that on the books?
I think I've heard some discussion of that. Yeah, I don't know the intricacies of that particular issue in terms of the mixing, but Corvallis drinks the water a good portion of the year. Wilsonville drinks the water, and that's where I think Hillsborough was it in the last 2 or 3 months moved ahead with planning for taking water from the Willamette. I think out of that same plant in Wilsonville. Yeah.
Oh, so there are people drinking that water. And you mentioned a while back, I was thinking, well, there's just no dams on the river. And I could not think of any dam on the river, but there are dams on the tributaries there.
Yeah, exactly. And those dams have had a tremendous impact on spring chinook, steelhead, and there is an effort underway now under the Endangered Species Act to improve the situation. So most of these dams are very tall. The fish passage that they originally planned, this is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in partnership with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, in some cases, to run the hatcheries. But the original plan was you put the fish in boxes and you pull those boxes up to the top of the dam and you release them into the reservoir. Well, we know now, decades later, that, and some people knew just after the construction of some of those projects, that just didn't work. And so you have this amazing fishery on the Willamette. If we're just talking spring chinook, it was in the hundreds of thousands of fish, of native, naturally reproducing fish, that today we only have a handful of thousands in comparison. Mm-hmm. And so those fish have been listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act for quite a few years now. In 2007, my organization sued the U.S. Army Corps along with the Bureau, the Bonneville Power Administration, and the Bureau of Reclamation and NOAA Fisheries to get them to improve fish passage at those dams, as well as take other measures. So these are dams on the McKenzie, the Middle Fork of the Willamette, the Santiam system. You have the North Santiam and South Santiam. A lot of water coming down those rivers that come from the Cascades on that side of the Willamette system.
We get a lot of rain.
And they're tremendously meaningful to supporting those healthy natural populations of salmon. So not to belabor the point, but right now we're in the middle of trying to figure out how do you get juvenile fish down through a reservoir and over the dam down to the river so they can migrate down to the main stem of the Willamette and come right through here on their way out to the Pacific.
Like Detroit Lake, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the trick, and that's the thing to figure out how you have they refer to it as the rate of mortality with those fish, how you have a low enough mortality rate to sustain the population if you have healthy habitat above and healthy habitat below. Mm-hmm. So in addition to degraded habitat throughout the Willamette system, both on the main stem and on some of the tributaries, you've got these giant, these massive projects that simply block their historic path.
Right, and you were talking about getting down. I mean, how do they get back up?
Exactly.
I mean, how do they get up above Willamette Falls there in Oregon City?
There's actually a much improved fish ladder that the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife redid a few years ago. That because the falls technically have a dam that's owned by PG, it's really kind of a structure that directs the water over toward their turbines, which are on the West Lynn side. They have a license from the federal government, from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and I think they got another 40 or 45-year license for that just a few years ago. But as part of that, they had to improve those fish ladders significantly, and they seem to be working okay. They're definitely working better than the old ones that were there. But your point stands. Then they have to make it up through 40 miles of the Newburgh Pool, where the Willamette's really flat, goes through suburbia, passes Newburgh, and then you get up to the Amhill River, and then you get a little more elevation in the river. It starts to take on a slightly different character. And then if you're a Santiam-bound fish, you still have to swim up past Salem, almost to Albany, and then you hang a left, and then you're confronted with this giant dam, depending on which tributary you're on. If you're looking at the North Santiam, where there's a little bit better population of native fish, what do you do? And unfortunately, the remedies to this are not perfect, like many things. There will likely be no fish ladders because the dams are too high, and you get a rate of mortality with fish ladders for
Right.
upward migrating
So they
fish.
talk about barging them.
Well, what they'll do is they have developed a new collection system. They'll do it more efficiently, keep the fish in better condition, and ultimately they'll still be trucked up above the reservoir and re-released to the river system. So the unfortunate part of that is it's still a very manipulated system, even with the best of the remedies that we're looking at currently. And I give NOAA Fisheries and those folks a lot of credit, because what you find out is that you're dealing with these massive bureaucracies. The Bonneville Power Administration and the Corps control the purse strings with these projects, even though they legally have to implement them. And then you have NOAA Fisheries and U.S. Fish and Wildlife who are pushing them and pushing them. So you kind of have this interesting dance of these very large federal entities with different missions, all trying to work together to improve the system on the Willamette's federally owned dams.
That's not something those agencies probably did too well in the past, is work together.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that, to give the Corps some credit, I mean, they have some great staff and great folks, and it's just figuring out, the nuances of how you get the funding and when you do a study versus another study, and kind of prioritizing. So even though it's been in 2008, we signed the settlement with them to implement this biological opinion. And all the BIOP is, it's really a list of things that have to be done and addressed to recover the fish, and fish passage is probably number one on that list.
All the things that have to be done, since people had their head up their butt for decades building these dams and with the fish ladders and all the different things that were done through decades and decades, where we thought we could just pump the resources forever and nothing would ever become of it.
Right.
And now we're having to come up with the science to rectify that, and we're not there yet, obviously.
Right. Yeah, things are trending in certain circumstances in the right direction, but yeah, we're not there. An interesting thing is I always kind of had that view too, that back in the day everybody just supported the dams. Let's build these projects, because Corvallis would get flooded, other parts of the valley would get flooded. The Portland area certainly.
Yeah, I'm from Redding, California, with the Shasta Dam. Whole valley project. Same thing.
Let's control it and prohibit these floods. But what you find out is I look back. There's a great website, I think through OSU, that looks at archives, different historical archives. You can find a lot of good information on there. And there was a letter from William Finley, and he was on the Oregon, I think it was called the Oregon Game Commission back in the 30s and 40s. And he had a letter in the Oregon Journal, the Evening Journal, and he said, you're going to kill these fisheries, you're going to decimate small towns, you're going to alter this system, and there's other things we could do without having such an ecological impact, nor spending the amount of money that was planned to be spent at that time. And here is a fairly eminent person who is very familiar with the biology of these fish, a great photographer as well, and the Finley National Wildlife Refuge was named after him, which is just south of Corvallis. And he's related to the Finley, I think, funeral home over off of Sunset.
I knew that name, from somewhere.
But what that told me was there wasn't complete concurrence.
And there were voices.
There were voices saying, well, hold on. But I think at that time, some of the reading I've done on the subject shows that really it was kind of the economic engine, and people wanted that work, and they wanted those construction projects, and there was some big part of it anyway. There's definitely an economic incentive to build those projects. So.
And there were so many fish, what can happen?
Well,
And we found out what could happen. It didn't take long to cause that problem. And I'm glad you brought up the fish in talking about this, because water is important, and when you're talking about water, fish are important. And then we'll start moving into the next that's important is people. And so, Portland has for a long time had some of the best water in the world, coming from the 52,000 acres up there in the Bull Run watershed, which in the early 70s I worked for a season up there stacking brush and had better roads than we do because of the logging that went on up there. So there are again, we can just log in our watershed. Well, Frank Gerhardt and some folks stopped all that. And now we have a situation with the water that a lot of people think that this water has been, the water itself hasn't been mismanaged, but the people's access to the water has been mismanaged to the point where there's been like I said, Kent Crawford and his group, Portlanders for Water Reform, has tried to move to take it away from the city council, because the Portland City Council pretty much allocate the water, and don't they have pretty much a say about how it's all done within the Portland area, and also to Gresham and a few other places. And there's been a big move to take that water rights, or that water responsibility, or however you want to phrase it, away from them. And I jumped on board after the situation with the back door speaking to the fluoride industry that happened last year. I thought, well, maybe we should take that away from them. They're meeting behind closed doors with industries. They're not letting the people understand what's going on. And I thought that was a great idea, but come to find out that a lot of people don't think it's a great idea. And Travis is willing to come on and talk about that perspective of groups like the Willamette Riverkeeper and the Audubon Society, and actually Bark, and a few others that I know off the top of my head, Trout Unlimited, I believe, that they're going to go and they're in opposition to this. And so, I suppose you could start in a lot of different places here. So wherever you think it's the best place to start to voice your opposition to this.
Well, I think the Portlanders for Water Reform, I understand that people, I grew up in the Portland area, and over the course of my lifetime, I've kind of seen, how our city does business and how it's structured. And even with the examples that they cite of what they call corruption, which are frankly extremely minor instances. I mean, if you look at the big picture of certain types of spending that have occurred over the past, decade or so that people gripe about, whether it's the Portland Water Bureau's Water House, which has been, receiving media over the past,
a lot of
few months. But when you really look at the aggregate, what do these entities do? I would say, from what I can see working for Willamette Riverkeeper, they're providing clean water to our homes, and they're dealing with our waste, and that's really what it's about. And they're meeting regulatory requirements under the Endangered Species Act and Clean Water Act, even more importantly. So I think the Portlanders for Water Reform on this issue are a little bit misguided, and I think some of the rhetoric that they've used is a bit dangerous. And then and we could delve into some of this, but the linkage with the reservoirs too, honestly, what the Bureau of Environmental Services does has nothing to do with the Portland Water Bureau delivering clean water to your homes, nor the issue with the reservoirs. But for some reason, this initiative brings those two bureaus together.
So what is the Bureau of Environmental Services then?
It's
separate,
both. It's both. Yeah, exactly. And that's the big, I think the critical issue is that you have two of these bureaus that have been targeted with this initiative. If it was just the Water Bureau, I think there would be good reason to argue the merits of such an initiative. But then you have this very large entity, the Bureau of Environmental Services, which does a lot of good work, lumped in with this initiative for some reason. It just doesn't make sense.
So they're completely different entities with different budgets?
Exactly. And so some of the groups, just kind of from the environmental perspective, who are already opposing this initiative, so Audubon Society of Portland, Friends of Trees, Bark, DPAVE, Trust for Public Land, Urban Green Spaces Institute, my organization, Willamette Riverkeeper, Coalition for a Livable Future, Oregon Environmental Council, Oregon League of Conservation Voters, Water Watch of Oregon, Zinger Farm, Verde, and League of Women Voters. Just to start with that kind of list of environmental groups.
That's before they've even got the initiative signatures and have it up on.
That's right. So I think when you look at what the Bureau of Environmental Services does, and you look at your bill when you open it every other month, and it's, mine's over $200. I can't remember, it's $219 or $238, and certainly that's a chunk of change. And I think people see that, and that is part of what is causing this effort, because you're paying two things there. You're paying for your water, your clean water into your home, and you're paying for the removal of your waste
and stormwater,
and a few other things, and stormwater control. Yeah. So if we look at what BES does, the Bureau of Environmental Services manages the infrastructure that takes all the waste from our homes and all of the stormwater that you see on a city street and goes down a grate or some other structure. That all gets commingled, and most of the time it goes out to the treatment plant where it's treated and then pumped into the Columbia River, the treated effluent. Now, the amount of effort and the engineering and the work involved by, I think BES employs something like 519 people in their last budget. It's tremendous if you really think about at the end of the day what they're accomplishing with hundreds of thousands of people, with everything from what goes down your toilet to what goes down your kitchen sink to what comes off the streets. That's what they're managing. Mm-hmm. And hopefully people remember that we had a very large project called the Big Pipe Project that was completed a little over a year ago, which was 2 giant pipes on either side of the river running from roughly the very south edge of Portland proper, parallel to the Willamette, all the way up to Swan Island. There was a tunnel constructed under the river that's probably 20 feet high that takes all of that stuff over to Swan Island. There was a giant new pump station built that pumps that stuff out to the Columbia Boulevard treatment plant. That was a huge project that cost, I think, slightly less than $1.4 billion. And so if you're thinking about what the Bureau of Environmental Services does, they manage that project and they pulled it off to where I think the EPA allows 4 exceedances per year. We used to have the combined sewer overflow happen almost every time it rained. So
but it never rains here, huh?
Right. So the reason for those pipes was to intercept all those old antiquated pipes, which reached their max, and where was the release valve? It was the Willamette River. Today that happens almost never, thanks to the big pipe, and that was the whole point, to decrease the amount of human waste that entered the Willamette River and to keep E. coli levels at a safe level. Mm-hmm. That's one piece of what we are funding when we get that bill. We're going to be paying that off for a couple of decades.
So you're saying this initiative is going to make a public utility district out of what comes to the homes and what comes out of the homes as well, then.
Right, exactly. So you'll have...
I didn't understand that until just now.
Yeah. So they propose, and that's one of the biggest issues. Why would they do that? Well, they point at things like the city acquired some land over by Riverview Cemetery. And, why would the city do that? Well, again, it's to protect the watershed. It's to create opportunities for stormwater to run off in a natural fashion before it flows into the Willamette. The city has a very real responsibility under the Clean Water Act to ensure that stormwater and other, let's call stormwater what it is, it's rain, to make sure the rain that meets that parking lot that has oil slicks on it and people's cigarette butts and all manner of other pollution, that doesn't enter Johnson Creek or the Columbia Slough and then find its way into the Willamette. And so again, if you just think of the scale of the infrastructure around us and just in one neighborhood, that this agency runs that and runs it usually successfully. There's always issues that come up or equipment failures and that kind of thing. We're all human, but they do it successfully. It's a really critical thing. Another thing that I've heard is go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, don't forget your point that you were going to make there, but is that funding going to the Bureau of Environmental Services coming from the people's water rates?
Yeah. So we fund their operations.
And I think the Portland Tribune, larger amount of money goes to the BES than goes to the Bureau of Water Works too, I believe.
I believe so. Yep. Yeah.
So that's they're messing with a fine-tuned instrument that seems to be working all right in many ways, and there may be some problems with some of the I don't know if you want to call it corruption, the way it's being ran on the water side. But I'm just trying to paraphrase and get a grip on what you were saying there. And but there's going to be repercussions that go much beyond. From what I understand, the folks that are the Portlanders for Water Reform think that a lot of this money is being wasted that's going to the Bureau in Environmental Services. I think I read that in a Portland Tribune article. Is that kind of what is?
My understanding is they think that, although interestingly enough, they don't come up with some very good examples for that. I mean, I think you could look at any bureaucracy of any size and say, they're doing the kind of core of their work, but there's a couple things I don't like. and you may not approve of building a water house for however much they spend building that. And you might not approve of certain upgrades at a facility that they own. Well, in a democratic process, you have an opportunity to go to that bureau and meet with them and find out more. Is there something that, I don't know about this project that could inform my thinking? You also have an opportunity to go to the city and say, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. Why does it make sense to you? And have that conversation. And within a democratic process, if you don't like what's going on, we have the opportunity to vote them out at present. That's where I think when you look at this new 7-member board with some very interesting conflict of interest rules in terms of connections to either the city or the Bureau of Environmental Services or the Water Bureau.
That's what the initiative wants to set in place.
Yeah. But if you look at a 7-member board, you're really setting up a duplicative democratic process that, frankly, within the city, it already exists. And that's where I think, if people have issues with these bureaus and have issues with what they're spending, it could be that the city hasn't articulated well enough why they're doing that. I mean, that's completely within the realm of possibility. Yeah, it's not even always clear to us, what's going on at all times with different projects. But what I've typically found out is if you delve into them and you meet with the staff, you figure out, oh, okay, they have a program that they've thought a lot about. There's a process for making improvements to certain properties or the sewer infrastructure. That's huge. Just keeping all of our infrastructure in good enough shape to actually have it work is huge. That they typically plan, and there's a reason that they're doing something. Maybe they're on a multi-year trajectory that isn't clear from the outside. So my sense is that before people jump to conclusions and sign a petition to create an initiative to basically rework a huge chunk of what the city does, they need to think a little bit more about it and really consider within the budgets of these two organizations, are these relatively minor projects the types of things that you could really call egregious with a straight face? And I don't think so. I mean, you could look at, they attribute it to Randy Leonard, former Commissioner Leonard, spending money on the McCall's facility for the Rose Festival. Yeah, that, you might be able to ask that question and wonder why that went that way and then have an opportunity to react, kind of in our existing democratic process. I'm not saying there's nothing to ever get riled up about.
When it comes to politics, you can't please all the people all the time.
Right.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. And folks, like, this isn't an issue that you're going to be able to read a few things. Given that it does get the signatures, you're going to read a few things on the voters pamphlet. But these days, things can be a lot more complicated than that. And I hope the viewers will, take your words at face value, but also dig around. There's a lot of other information out there. These other organizations, I forget the fellow's name with the Audubon Society.
Bob Salinger, probably, yeah.
He was on a few years back talking about the island up there.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't been able to get in contact with him to come on and talk about this, but I hope he would too.
Well, one of the things, though, I think if people take a step back and they say, where is this coming from? You need only look at what we know about who is funding the group,
money.
the Portlanders for Water Reform. And what we understand is that Siltronic, which is a big company in the Portland Harbor stretch of the Willamette, and they use a lot of water, they're funding this effort to reform the system. Certainly Portland Bottling, that has been well documented over the past few months, and they have an economic interest to try to drive rates lower, to keep your soda pop cheap, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
What was the other one? Precision Cast Parts. That was a real surprise to me. Huge international company that has some local facilities.
A lot of pollution coming from there.
Yeah, there's definitely been some media about that. But if you look at the types of contributions that Mr. Crawford or Crayford are getting and where this is coming from, I think it's a far cry from a grassroots effort to truly deal with some of the issues that your average ratepayer has once they're informed about, again, this initiative, it doesn't just tackle the Water Bureau, which I'm angry at for whatever reason. It would greatly affect the Bureau of Environmental Services. And segue to that is that the Bureau of Environmental Services does a lot of work for watershed restoration, certainly all the infrastructure stuff we talked about, but the city has a very real role in helping to recover the salmon we were talking about in relation to the dams. They have helped foster a lot of restoration work, both to meet Clean Water Act requirements, again, Clean Water Act federal law, Endangered Species Act federal law. They've done a lot of work to restore habitat under the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, to help recover those same fish. And this gets us to Superfund, because when I look at my bill, and so other people are like, well, why do I pay for Superfund? This doesn't make sense. Well, because the city has operated the infrastructure for decades that has helped to, because of all those sewer overflows that happened over 100 times a year, directly into the Willamette, untreated wastewater, sewage, whatever you want to call it, right into the river, carrying with it varying levels of pollution. The city is one of what they call a potentially responsible party under the Clean Water Act. And those potentially responsible parties include the City of Portland, the Port of Portland, let's see if I get all my names right, Chevron, Vigor Industrial, quite a few of the other larger businesses. Gunderson is one of them, down in the Portland Harbor area that are right on that stretch of river that's very polluted. Those folks are paying for the process of studying the river, as I mentioned before, that have kind of brought us through the last 12 years to now, where we're getting close to actually taking action and having a plan to clean up those contaminated sediments. The city is one of those potentially responsible parties, but they have done it in a way that is, I think, more forward-thinking than some of the other potentially responsible parties. They've invested funds on behalf of the city, both to protect ratepayers, so that people don't point at the city because it has the ability to get bonds and potentially raise money from the people.
Yeah.
So remember that they have smart staff and consultants who are very protective of ratepayer liability in this whole Superfund cleanup. So when people complain about that, all they've been funding is for city staff to be vigilant and out there doing the right thing by ratepayers. At the same time, those city staff have also kind of carried that dual burden, if you will, of also wanting to do the right thing under the public trust. They want the Willamette River in the city of Portland to be clean enough so that you can catch a smallmouth bass and eat it without adding cancer risk, because that's really what's driving this whole Superfund site. They want habitat and clean sediments so that those macroinvertebrates on the river bottom aren't polluted, so that the fish don't get polluted, so that the osprey that fly over and catch a sucker don't get their bodies polluted by PCBs and other contaminants. And so that's my long way of saying that the city has been both protective of ratepayers and also forward-thinking and wanting to get the cleanup to occur. Just in the past year, they signed an agreement with the US EPA, who is overseeing the whole cleanup, to begin a preliminary site design for the cleanup of what they call River Mile 11 East. And basically, it's the east side, upstream side of the Fremont Bridge, where there's very high levels of PCBs in the sediment there. And that's linked to the old Albina shipyard that used to exist there. So that's an example where the city, with that little, I can't remember, it's less than $2 or slightly more than $2 charge, is using that money to do the right thing on behalf of the people of Portland and investing early so that when the record of decision is signed, hopefully within a couple years for Portland Harbor, the city, along with some very large companies like Cargill and Westinghouse, they also signed with the city an agreement with the EPA to begin the design for the cleanup of that site. So again, this is a lot of work that's kind of gone under the radar, I think, in the last decade, the city's role in that. Now, does that mean that Willamette Riverkeeper or others won't push them or agree with everything they do? Certainly not. We might say, well, hey, why don't you, do some more work over here, or, you left this other site, you could have been involved there. So we will certainly have our disagreements over time, but I think you need to if people are voting on this measure, they need to understand what they're tinkering with before they decide to totally disrupt the entire anatomy of our city democratic process.
Right, throwing out the baby with the washwater.
Yeah.
And that could very well be. Well, you're certainly given me a lot of information about this, and I was going to lead to that, the PCBs and all that, but I'm glad that you got to that. It's pretty important. So we're down to about 18 minutes, and we can continue the conversation. There's a lot to talk about here, and I'll be glad to do that. But if anybody wants to call in and ask questions, there's certainly a lot of questions to be asked here, and maybe some comments. Maybe you're all for this. Well, tell us your reasons why, and give us, you know, if you're going to stand up and give us your reasons why, you know, we'll be willing to listen, and but you're also going to have to explain, you know, why you think that perhaps the Bureau of Environmental Services need to be taken away from the city and moved into a public utility district. Now, a few years ago, I was all for creating a public utility district from the Portland General Electric, and I still think that was a big mistake that it wasn't done. And but you know, that doesn't mean that this is the right thing to do. So there's a lot of different ways to go about this. Portland, according to something you just showed me, I forget the exact. They had a bar graph on the different cities and what they pay for water. Portland was kind of somewhere in the middle, wasn't it?
Yeah, you know, it's a point that's brought up pretty often as people say, well, our rates are high, and they are. They're definitely high. Maybe they're not high, but they're higher than what we all became accustomed to spending. We've certainly seen increases. So I think we need to be careful about how we talk about it. And it's a significant investment in my every other month, you know, bill paying. Oh yeah, I got to pay that.
Yeah, it's getting bigger all the time.
But remember, we are helping, among other things, you know, we're getting clean water into our homes, and we're dealing with that waste, but we're also paying off that $1.4 billion investment we made in the big pipe. And on this sheet that I have here, let's see, I think this is 2010 data, so it's a little old. Atlanta, Georgia's at the top. Honolulu, Hawaii, then Seattle, then Juneau, then Puyallup, Washington, then Olympia, and then we get to Tacoma, and then Portland. And then there's a host of cities below that aren't that far below. Cincinnati, Knoxville, McMinnville, San Diego, San Francisco, Sacramento. And the point of bringing this up is that Portland rates did go higher than many other places, but then those other cities began to have similar projects they were building to upgrade their sewer system. So you look at Atlanta, I can't remember the price that they're paying, but it was significantly higher than Portland's $1.4 billion sewer upgrade. Mm-hmm. And so I think when you look at it in a national context, that who will be, those cities who will be completing their projects in the next few years, suddenly they're going to be higher or right where Portland is, because again, it's a significant investment to make, but it's done for a good reason, and a lot of cities are doing it now.
And like with anything else, that's just a snapshot of right now,
yeah,
or whenever it was made. I think I saw the light flash. We have a call. Hey, you're on the air.
Oh, right on.
Welcome to the program.
Jim. Thanks a lot for the program, and thank you, Travis, for taking the time to explain all this neat stuff to us.
You bet.
And my comment is, first of all, about the supposed fixes to the Portland Water Bureau. I would, for myself, I would like a more complete picture to emerge of what is going to happen before I get on board or choose one side or the other. I'm a little skeptical when the people who were part of the problem, the politicians and corporations, are enthusiastic about the supposed solution. I'm not too enthused about that. So the other thing, Travis, if you might speak to toxic mixing zones, and if any effort has been made to eliminate or reduce those, and I'll take my question or my answers off the air. Thank you very much.
You bet. Yeah, thanks for the question.
I hope you know what he means, because I don't.
I do.
Good. I was worried about that.
Well, I think the first part of the question, if I understand it right, is this new initiative, which we do not support, would create a 7-member board with roughly equal geographic representation throughout the city. They would basically run the Bureau of Environmental Services and the Water Bureau. So they would have oversight of those bureau directors and, of course, the budgets and staffing. So ultimately the staffing.
So it's creating another bureaucracy then.
Yeah, it does create another bureaucracy to fix the bureaucracy that they're not happy with. And it's our contention that in doing that, it's duplicative. You'll get everything that comes with a new board that is unproven, with folks who aren't necessarily fully aware of what these entities do, but certainly mean well. And you have yet another entity which will interface with the same contractors and folks who now do business with the city. And of course, with those board members, though, what's interesting is if you have ever had contact with the city or worked with them or participated in a project through either of those bureaus, I can't remember the time restriction, I'm spacing that at the moment, you can't be on that board. And then, interestingly, you can only serve one term. And to us, again, it just seems like it's an over-the-top response to what may be some legitimate issues that people have cause to complain about in terms of expenditures with the Water Bureau. But if you look at it in the aggregate with the budgets of these two agencies and all the good people who work there and the good work that they do, you're talking about an infinitesimally small slice of those budgets that people have any quibble with. And again, you're looking at examples like the Waterhouse or the land that the Bureau of Environmental Services purchased for watershed health at Riverview Cemetery. I'm just bringing those up because I've heard those percolate as kind of two of the leading examples of the quote-unquote corruption that some folks say is occurring. And frankly, I don't think it's corruption. I think, these entities do business. They have contractors who do business with them. Sometimes people win another contract. I know in the case of the Bureau of Environmental Services, there's multiple contractors those folks use for a whole variety of projects in addition to their great staff. So again, from Willamette Riverkeeper's perspective, as well as all those other organizations that I listed earlier, it's an over-the-top response. It's a poorly designed response to what is really, in our view, not a significant problem in the running of the Bureau of Environmental Services and the Water Bureau. Now, to your other question on toxic mixing zones, mixing zones are an area under the Clean Water Act where if I'm the city of Portland or if I'm a company that has treated wastewater and I treat that wastewater to a certain standard that's set by the Oregon DEQ, I can then release that water back to the Willamette River, sometimes the ocean, but pick your river system, you have these discharge points. And the mixing zones are basically areas in those rivers where a permit holder is able to not meet the standards that are in their permit. So you have higher concentrations. Let's say there's a standard for turbidity, which is just the cloudiness of the water. So within a certain area, and sometimes they're very large, 100 meters by 50 meters, they could violate that standard in the river in that area. And once it leaves that zone, that kind of amorphous blob of water, it has to meet the standard. Of course, it's a theoretical construct in that there are calculations that are made by DEQ and the permittee that say, well, if we put X concentration of pollutant in this volume of water, it'll settle out and meet the standard by the edge of that mixing zone. A few years ago, we had tried in the Oregon legislature to reduce the size of those zones and or mark them. We had a bill called the buoy bill, which was not successful, but we said, hey, let's put a buoy by all these mixing zones just so the public will know, gosh, the water's a slightly different color here, or maybe there's some other issue that they are detect. Maybe they're smelling something coming off of that mixing zone. Then they would know, oh, this is a mixing zone. Well, that was fought by the pulp and paper industry as well as the cities. They didn't like that idea. 2 years ago, actually a year and a half ago in the summer, I was with an Oregon State Parks employee up by Halsey, Oregon. We were in one of our Riverkeeper canoes. Beautiful stretch of river, most of it kind of the summer green, and we were chit-chatting, and we're actually doing just some investigation of the greenway, and we looked down on one side of the canoe, and it was black. The water was literally very dark brown or black. And I knew there was a pulp mill about 3 miles away, and I knew that their discharge was in this area, but we hadn't noticed it going by. And so what was happening was their mixing zone was malfunctioning, and that area, I think they were allowed maybe 200 feet by 50 feet. That mixing zone stretched downriver in basically a dark plume about a mile. And it had this wretched smell. They have a lot of tannins that are part of that process, and they were it's a decomposition process. Really a bad smell and black water. And that's an example, it was a very visible example of how those mixing zones are still allowed today. It's not in all cases saying that they're a bad thing, but I think there are some examples where you could question if there's a higher concentration of pollution in a mixing zone in the middle of the Willamette River, is there any difference between that water and the water we have nearby? Or if you're thinking like a fish and you're swimming upstream and you're going through that thing, it might be cloudy, it might be warmer, it might have something else in it. Is that problematic? And those are the types of questions that we've raised over the years. If for no other reason, just to let folks like our good caller here, who seems to know about that issue, that this is how the Clean Water Act works in the modern age, and it's been that way for a long time. The original goal of the Clean Water Act was to have all the pollutants out at the end of the pipe before it was discharged to the river. Right. Because of various loopholes and nuances in the law, in most places they have mixing zones. So last year we went back with a bill to at least place signage, just to say, here's a permit, because of my experience with that pulp. 7 or 8 years went by, and then I had this shock to the system, like, we need to get back to this just for public education efforts. And again, the cities fought it, and they said, well, signs won't work, they're hard to put up, and the river can take them out sometimes. The pulp and paper industry hated the idea, and we weren't ultimately successful, but we've brought the issue back up. And I think there is value in letting people know that, oh, wow, here's a sign up on the riverside. There's a permitted discharge in this area. If there's something weird about it, you would have a number to call, and you would be able to report, hey, I think there's something going on here. That was our proposal. I have a simple sign where those discharges are. And there's precedent for it, which is really cool, in that the state of New York and Tennessee have signage at all their discharges. And so two states that are very different politically kind of shared a common value about, doesn't it make sense? It's a public waterway. Why can't we, if we're out there fishing or paddling a canoe and I pass something, why shouldn't I be informed that this is a discharge point into a public waterway of treated effluent? Now, again, that's not indicting those who are discharging. I'm sure there's many discharges most of the time that are perfectly legal, they're working as they're designed, but in those instances where things aren't working, in the case that I found out up there by Halsey, it made a lot of sense. If I was just a general person who didn't know about that, I could look up and, there's the name of the permit holder, and there's a phone number I can call to say, hey, what's up?
Right. So everything that you're saying, it makes perfect sense. And, I think I agree that the sign should be up there. People should be informed. And I think maybe we should thank Kent Crayford for what he did here, for the standpoint that he's creating a situation where a lot of information is getting out there, and people are, well, I didn't know that. Well, I didn't know that. What else don't I know? And hopefully, along with everything you've had to say and what people are going to dig up in other sources, they're going to find out more about what's going on with the Water Bureau, what's going on with the Bureau of Environmental Services. I knew there was a BES. I didn't really know how it related to the Water Bureau, or whether they were separate or the same or what. And these are important details that are going to generate whether or not people vote for this or not, I would think, in the long run.
Well, what I found interesting, not to promote one paper of note in our town over others, but there's this thing called PolitiFact that the Oregonian does in regard to different issues, and I think we've seen examples of that over time. They found that the recent statements involving the Portlanders for Water Reform, saying that the reasoning behind Portland's high water and sewer rates is all kinds of pet projects unrelated to the core function of the Water and Sewer Bureau. So the Portlanders for Water Reform have been saying that those pet projects are the reason for higher rates, and PolitiFact found that mostly false. So I just think, and I certainly don't always agree with what these folks say, but in their analysis, when you really look at the actual numbers and the reason we have higher rates right now, like the big pipe and other regulatory requirements, it's not a bunch of pet projects that are causing higher rates.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good to know. Although, boy, my last $300 bill made me go, what? And it's gone up a lot since the month before that. I don't know. You move to different parts of town, maybe there's different prices, but there's a lot.
Well, remember, clean water and sewer.
And sewer.
Yeah. So I always look and I say, okay, so for $150 a month, could you at your own home get rid of all the waste that comes out of your house and get clean water in the house and meet the requirements of the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act?
Maybe I
could.
Or
could even your neighborhood figure out how to do that?
Maybe we could, but it would take an investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and maybe it would end up being $150 a month.
Or even
over
more.
a period of time, right? But it takes an incredible amount of industry and mechanics in order to do this. Right. And I see we're down to about 3 minutes. Is there any major points we missed? I mean, the time went by quick.
I don't think so. I mean, again, I understand people have legitimate issues, and I would caution folks to just take a little more time to look at it. There's a lot of great people who are doing really important work at these agencies, and I think if people were able to see really where the majority of the funding goes, they might reconsider their gripes with one expenditure or another that is a relative sliver in that pie chart on the overall budget. And, again, we're investing these funds over the next couple of decades, especially in relation to the big pipe, because, we dealt and are dealing with a really huge issue there under the Clean Water Act. It used to be regular to have sewage in the Willamette.
Is that
we don't have that sewage anymore.
At all, or just mostly?
A couple times a year they're allowed when you have extreme rain events, where even the new giant system can't even handle it. I think they had 2 last year versus over 100 historically.
Dozens and dozens,
almost every time it rained, I would also point folks to, in the next year, there's going to be some major decisions relating to the Portland Superfund site. The draft plan is going to come out and be issued by the EPA. That'll trigger a public comment period that people can provide comments about the remedies for that cleanup. And we're looking at removing sediment or leaving it in place and covering it up with clean material. It's called capping. If you remove it, which we favor, what do you do with the contaminated sediment? There's a variety of things that can be done, but I just wanted to flag that for folks. It's coming pretty quick, really, and if you look at the Willamette Riverkeeper website or get on our listserv or get on Audubon's listserv or even Region 10 of the EPA, you'll get a lot of information about the Superfund over the next few months. And we're going to start kind of a public education effort starting in February on that topic.
Well, if you can keep my phone number there, give me a call when that comes in, and I'll try to remember to get a hold of you, and we can bring you on and talk about that, or at least come in and make a quick interview, and we can bring that interview in and play that, let folks know that's going on, because a Superfund site's a damn important thing.
10 miles of contaminated sediment in the Willamette River today.
And it's been there for what, 50 years?
Many decades in some cases, even longer, 100 years.
My God. Yeah, and it's going to stay there unless we do something about it, and there's no telling what kind of problems that is causing. Well, I see we're down to 27 seconds here. It sure goes quick. I've amassed a whole lot of information. I'm going to have to watch this show myself a couple of times to get this information on. But I want to thank Travis for coming on the program.
You're welcome.
You really brought in some good information. I also want to thank the crew. They're in there working hard, making us look good out here. And I also want to thank the caller, and we'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in.